right out language.
All right, so all those corrections, I would hear a motion for the approval of the February 17th minutes.
I will move that the minutes be approved as corrected.
And a second. Thank you. Again, with those corrections, any further changes, corrections? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
And opposed, the same. Thank you, minutes are passed. So our first agenda item you have in your packet. We're starting the congestion management process this year. Dale has a beginning a memo in there. Dale, I'm going to let you walk through that.
I think, really the feds see the congestion management process as being pretty critical. We had a UPWP review, and they kind of wondered why we did an annual report a little bit. They said it's not required in the regs. Well, it's not, but the process is required. We don't have to generate a report, but I think the report's important. So what's happening now is that we're moving forward on the 2011 report, and we should have a draft ready for next month. But this is really to start making sure that in 2012 we collect all the right data. A lot of the data collection we do is in the spring. So the spring of 2012 will actually be in the report that's prepared in the spring of 2013. So this is just to make sure that we are collecting stuff, we're not duplicating efforts and that type of stuff. I, as always, request that if you have traffic counts, turn movement counts, or other transportation data that your agency has collected, that you would forward that to me. I need that data. With that, attached to your memo, you see a couple spreadsheets. One is the travel times we will be collecting, or we were proposing to be collected. I had a conversation with the city this last week, and they have changed their process for doing concurrency a little bit. And I think we might be in the process of, we might try to do all the corridors, we might try to keep what we're doing now. I'm not quite sure. I expect to have a conversation from them, or a conclusion from them early next week, which corridors they want to be done. We'll try to blend them within our program. If there's a whole bunch more requests than what we have now, we might have to figure out how to pay for it, which is another discussion. Second page is vehicle occupancy counts. That's how many people are in each automobile. So what we do with that is we often we send the consultants who is quality counts. We send them out. They do the travel time, they do the occupancy counts, and they do tube counts or traffic counts. And as we request, there are 4 locations. We do both AM and PM, only in the peak direction, and try to figure out, are we seeing any change in vehicle occupancy? We have seen a steady decrease as was occurring over the years, so we expect to continue to see that. More people in the peak hour are driving by themselves, which again impacts capacity. So those are the 4 locations that we have. But you can see that there's probably about 20 locations that we collect, and we try to collect 4 every year and rotate that around. It takes us about 4 years to get through. And then the traffic count locations, I did hear back from Rob Klug at the county that they have a permanent traffic recorder at 1 location. I'm trying to remember, I think this was after his comment, so this is the corrected list. What I would ask jurisdictions to do again is look through these. If you have a tube count that's been taken in the last year, any of those locations, stop me from sending it to the consultant, and we'll take that off and we'll insert your data. I don't want to duplicate data. So this memo is really about data collection for the 2012 report that will be out in 2013.
So you're looking for feedback?
Yeah, really. I'm just asking everyone to really kind of read through this stuff here and make sure we're not duplicating any efforts.
Clarification, you had mentioned at the beginning the 4 traffic counts and turning movements to you.
Yes.
Are those the ones that developers would do for their sites, or the ones that the city would do for
both
warrants?
Yeah, we would ask that you would send us both. The county has been really good about sending us their data. WashDOT's pretty good about sending data, but other jurisdictions I haven't got. My guess is there's a lot less development occurred in the last year, and so yes, if you have counts at all, whether developers or city counts, please send them to me, because that will stop us. Last year I did a traffic count, for example, I think it was in the county, and found out after I did collected the data, which might have cost us, I don't know, 50 to 100 bucks, that it's duplication of effort. It's not a big thing, one location, but I I prefer not to review something that's already been done.
So at least you know it. You may or may not become part of the whole program. At least
Right.
we know where it
So,
is.
but I do ask the cities in particular, if you have developers or yourself do any data collection, please send that to
How
me.
recently do you want?
Just in the last, well, if you haven't sent them to me for a while, maybe the last 2 years.
And maybe Mark has, I don't know, it's just,
I don't think I've received anything from Battleground.
I'll check it.
So anything more than 2 years old is probably not worth sending to me at this point, but in the last 2 years would be helpful.
Okay.
Well, we're going to do major accounts this summer that we use for our payment management program. We do them every 4 years.
Okay, you might want to look at these account locations,
Yeah.
because I would hate to go out in April. We start, the data collection begins the week after spring break and lasts about a month to 6 weeks. And I'd hate to count something in April and then have you turn around in June or July
Well,
and
and
count.
vice versa, you know, if we're gonna do an account.
Yeah. And this is really set up to help you with, it's more than just our congestion management system. We do want to help local jurisdictions. So if we're doing an account, you might want to look at your list and not count if we're counting it in April, May.
We'll trade lists.
Yeah, please.
That's the idea.
That's the idea.
Anybody else see questions?
Okay, that was just informational coordination. The next agenda item, you all are well aware of, this is part of a, I don't know, it'll be quite a year long, but it'll certainly carry into the fall, where we're going to relook at our 10-year transportation project priorities, and there's various facets of this. I know a month ago, much of the RTAC agenda item addressed this point. We're intending to do that too. I'm going to let Linda, Bob, and kind of Mark carry their different pieces of the memo, but I guess just by way of introduction, I think, you know, we're learning as we go through this too, and it isn't, I think, that the 10-year project prioritization process is going to produce something completely new and revolutionary, but I think what we're beginning to see is, again, we had a pattern of development for 20 years that was just very, very, very fast paced. And we almost spoke a certain language around the project improvements that we looked at. We were always looking at capacity. We were always looking at expansion. We know that has shifted to where we are today, and as we make this 10-year forecast, we're doing it, you know, from a look at where we are today, and it's sort of like our conversation around those priority projects is changing. And so I think that's a lot of what we're trying to do in the first steps of this, is sort of redefine those words, that conversation, that base point that we're starting from. And then out of that, make this 10-year list of regional priorities. So I guess that's at least what I'm beginning to really absorb out of this as we begin to do this. So you've got a memo that came out in your packet. I'm going to let Linda start and begin to walk through that. Again, I also want to emphasize to you that as we've had these conversations at the board level, they're really looking to their staff, to you guys, to help us as we articulate to them, because you can't all be there talking to them at the same time. So we become sort of your voices as we pull this together to reach the scale. So it is important that we get your feedback and your thoughts and your ideas and how you're defining these terms, et cetera. So Linda, I'm going to let you start to take me through the memo.
Yeah, in the memo, we're trying to encapsulate the discussion we heard at last month's RTAC meeting to sort of have you opportunity to review and see that we're getting things correct. We want to really focus on, as you see in the first paragraph, 4 distinct items. We want to review the transportation investment policy issues, it was discussed last month. We wanted to review how we're going to go about the 10-year revenue forecast, probably that discussion, and then we want to also review how we're going to use the 6-year transportation improvement programs as the starting point for coming up with a 10-year list of projects and strategies to consider. And then Mark's going to give a brief overview about the 10-year travel demand forecast. So first off, as you see at the bottom of page 1 of the memo is the transportation investment categories that we spoke about at last month's meeting. And then if you turn the page, there's some discussion about what we heard from you. And think some of the points that were made is that oftentimes a good project is going to straddle a lot of these investment categories. It's not going to fit neatly into one of the categories. So you're going to have projects that will really encompass a lot of these issues. It might be operational improvement that will also improve safety and also take care of some preservation and maintenance issues, for example. We also heard from you about the investment category we had stated as highway capacity expansion, including existing needs and future needs. But there was discussion about, well, really more importantly is it could be system expansion, but in terms of upgrading to urban standards or removal of system gaps with connecting pieces, segments of the highway system. And so we're going to try to reflect that better in the categories we've got. We also had discussion about preservation and maintenance is probably our top priority. And we had a discussion about how the amount spent on preservation and maintenance, the percentage spent, is changing over time. It's increased, for example, from 2000, it was 26% of budgets for transportation, and it's increased to 50% by 2009. We also had a discussion about how maintenance deferral is going to result in higher cost and a higher amount having to be expended on preservation and maintenance in the future if we keep on deferring the maintenance that's required. We also had a discussion at the February meeting about how this 10-year transportation project priorities will probably give us opportunity to think about how a regional coordinated approach to try to compete for more limited transportation funding at the state and federal level. And we had a discussion of, for example, of the Tiger Grant funding requirements and criteria, and how it takes a lot of effort to actually put together a competitive grant application, which will require us all to work together. And I think that's one of the opportunities we can realize as part of this 10-year transportation project priorities.
Let's go back through that. I mean, if you just go back to the first page, even investment categories, I know you've talked about this, but again, in that little bit of that translation of sort of previous definition of terms and investment categories to kind of, as we're trying to rethink this next 10-year window, I guess one that I'd heard from our staff and that had been talked at the last RTEC meeting is this category of highway capacity expansion. Again, that was terminology that we were really familiar with over the last 20 years, really. But is that really capturing it? What I heard you began to talk a lot about in small cities as well as the other, the larger areas in Vancouver is sometimes upgrading to urban standards while you're not really expanding capacity. You're not adding 2 lanes or 4 lanes necessarily. You are upgrading the facility. Do we think of that as, capacity expansion, or should we have a category that better captures that upgrade to urban standards? So I'm looking for any dialogue around those lines. And then Mark had pointed out to me in the first paragraph of the second page, as we talk about highway system expansion and highway system completion, sometimes we think of highway system completion as that, completing part of a grid or completing part of a corridor that needed to be done. And are we, again, as we think of how we define those terms, system completion and system expansion, sort of the old way of saying it previously versus new, are we really capturing that? So I guess maybe just to take a little bit of time and hear back from you before we move into the 10-year revenue forecast discussion of is this really using the best words we think we want to. So I'm looking for any feedback on this. What do you think of system expansion? Is that taking a 2-lane roadway and making it 4 lanes?
I think anytime we improve an arterial corridor to local planning, like the adopted comp plan accomplishes a lot of goals. It improves safety, it provides multi-modal connections, improves mobility. It's tough and difficult in one area.
Well, it is. We know there's duplication, but yet.
So if you call that system expansion, it's different than just mobility. It's planned expansion.
Yeah. So should we refine how we call that again? And highway, is that sending the message, oh, that's a state-owned facility versus a roadway that may be an urban arterial. So do we need to better refine this? Or?
When we rank it in our priority grade, we have points actually for conformance with the comp plan or arterial atlas by itself. And that means a lot of different things, but it's important that we are delivering per plans. Plans essentially reflect priorities at the time of adopting systems.
I think there's a meet plan, is a meeting the current comp plan.
We still need to give a better defined label than just that. Because ultimately this gets talked about in terms of projects. So
regional goals, perhaps, or regional.
Yeah.
I almost like that suggestion of the roadway capacity expansions. I think it depends on who reads this. They may term what you said, that if they just see highway, they may think state run, state routes only, interstates, those things, and not think of the arterial streets, the local streets within cities and counties.
So a lot of times, it doesn't really get at the main issue of what we're seeing a lot of is less of widening to 2 to 4 lanes, but more of bringing it up to urban standards.
Right, which provides safety, might make the turn movements necessary, the turn pockets necessary, which also then improves capacity. But it isn't, again, just that same scaling that we were talking about before. Okay, so we'll begin with that then, say highway and roadway capacity. Maybe again expansion. Again, I just want us to be thinking about some of these words, improvement even. Again, we're trying to get something that is clear about the sort of projects that this 10-year prioritization process is going to produce.
Because when you bring up a project urban standards, you're meeting so many of these goals. I mean, if not all of them,
right? Basically. So then in the explanation of that category, I think we need to add that it's in conformance with comp plan, in conformance with functional class, or with roadway standards.
Or adopted regional goals.
Adopted regional goals.
What's the difference between operational improvements to existing facilities and what was just said about the highway/road capacity expansion or improvements? Wouldn't those be somewhat interchangeable or maybe mean the same thing?
They're almost operations, almost like transportation system management types of things, civilization improvements, optimization.
Oh, okay, those things versus the.
Yeah, we're kind of trying to, again, it's so, and it's focused around the existing facility. I mean, you're right, you could have, under the new definition of what we just described, a sort of roadway improvement that was bringing it up to an urban standard, but I think we're still trying to draw a little bit of a difference between it. It's really dealing with more of the physical attributes of that roadway, even though they blend together somewhat, versus the operational improvements that really are at a little bit more the operational. But where they both have some gray area is the operational improvements can have safety improvements, can have turn pockets in it. It's maybe more of some of the signalization kinds of issues, but it can have some of both. So I think they're worth distinguishing, but
right, and that helps to get a better understanding of what it was meant by operational.
Yeah, that's the idea. Okay, any further feedback? I don't need to dwell on this too long.
Yeah, I was just sort of thinking we can have a short description, but then have better explanation.
I think that's what we need to do, is draw this
other
out.
things. so that we don't sort of pigeonhole ourselves into thinking just adding lanes.
Okay, if there are no more comments on that, then the other component of what we wanted to begin to talk about, Bob has been working on the revenue forecast. You've got, again, an explanation in your packet, Bob.
Yeah, thank you. Last month's artifact I talked about preservation and maintenance and having bars, bar charts that represented a proportion of how that changes over time. And with that discussion, we also talked about other information that might be helpful to kind of put that more in context and help understand what it means in terms of our future responsibilities for preservation and maintenance, and also the fact that on the capital side, construction costs have increased, so it's better to understand that better too, and how those needs both for construction and preservation and maintenance may change over time. So, and also in board meeting last month, one thing they were interested in was understanding how much environmental regulations and permitting affect construction costs as well. So what I want to do now is kind of summarize the kind of information that came up both at RTAC and RTC board, and then I've got a chance to put some of that together, so I'll share some of that with you. And then also I'll give you an overview of what we're thinking about for the 10-year revenue forecast, or the new revenue forecast. So going to the middle of the top of page 3, the main things that came up last month at RTAC had to do with maybe clarifying the bar charts. So we put preservation and maintenance on the bottom of the bar so we can see how it steps up over time, which was a percentage that Linda talked about earlier. In addition to that, looking at some other sources to understand better construction cost information or inflation. So what our money bought 10 years ago versus what it buys now. In addition to that, another thing that came up was, there's a preservation and maintenance, was what about our pavement condition and the lane miles that we have to be responsible for. So I got some information together I'll talk about in a minute regarding that, because as Linda mentioned, deferred maintenance costs more the more you put it off, and so we looked at some historical data for pavement condition as well. I mentioned the board concerned about environmental permitting and regulations. Even though we know that every project is different, and all have different, very, very unique in terms of the size and type of projects, I worked with the local agencies to come up with 3, what I might call representative projects that can demonstrate how those things affect each of these 3 projects. And they're listed in the middle of the page there. 88th Street, Sun Creek Interchange, and 18th Street. And we looked at kind of common environmental factors to determine how that's affected. We talked about drainage control, erosion, stormwater treatment, wetlands mitigation, and environmental mitigation, and how those affect project costs. So I think before I go on to the no new revenue approach, I'll kind of describe some of the things I found so far. This is very preliminary, but kind of interesting stuff. On pavement condition, for example, Clark County, I have 3 years, and kind of matched up the years between the 2 agencies. But for Clark County, they gave me ratings of pavement conditions of 60 or more, or 76 or more. For both, I got that for 2, but essentially, 76 is kind of a goal of what you want to try to achieve in your road system is ideal. Generally, rating of 70 is kind of acceptable. A rating of 60 we call satisfactory. But anything below 60, you're kind of getting to a point where you need to determine whether your road is rehabilitation or not. So it gives you an idea of what you're looking at in terms of your responsibilities.
And I guess I'm looking for the jurisdictions. So these are points, and most people use the sort of same criteria. So a 60 road to you and a 60 road to you would be sort of more or less the same. I mean, you see what I'm saying? Is because
typically we're not looking to rehab until less than 50.
You might not
it's
choose differently,
different,
but the criteria by which you rank the preservation.
What triggers it, it's different for each agency, but the standard.
The standard is the same.
Yes.
That's what. Okay.
Yeah. So, for example, go ahead, Sean.
I was just going to say, in presenting those numbers, I think it's the pavement degradation curve. I think is very important for policymakers to see each time you present those numbers, because of that tipping point where all of a sudden you start to degrade pretty quickly.
Oh, so
and they really get
there's a
that.
pavement degradation curve for PCI.
You see the slope really increases after you hit some of these numbers, and it's a good graph to present.
It's not
the numbers to understand why they're important.
So here's the numbers, but here's what they mean.
Yeah,
There's a big difference between 70 and 60 than there is for 60 and 50.
in terms of the slope and how quickly your system's going
It
to
just
degrade.
starts to denigrate quickly.
Okay. Good point.
Good point, yeah.
You need a copy of that?
I do. I would talk about think I've seen it on the webpage when I was looking at it a couple days ago. But I think,
Yeah, we should list the criteria.
So just as an example, for Clark County, I had 3 years I was able to pull for 2002, 2006, and 2009. And for a PCI of 60, for Clark County, it goes from 84 to 94 to 89. So it's, not bad.
Say that slower again, so.
Sorry, for PCI of 60 or above.
Okay.
It goes from 84% just to 94%, and it goes back down to 89% for those 3 years. Okay.
So 2009 is worse than 2006, but it's not as bad as 2002.
Correct. That's correct. And you see the same thing when you look at a PCI of over 76. It's 73% in 2002, 87%, so it goes up in 2006, goes back down to 68% in 2009. So it gives you a sense of how, at least at the higher level of PCI, that numbers start to drop a little bit for Clark County.
So definitely, I mean, you just haven't had time to craft it. Definitely the crafting of this.
Yeah, I just got this final put together yesterday, so it's kind of hot off the press. So I call it preliminary, and I think it was
There are people, I mean, is this making sense?
Well, that's for the county. So the county has the road fund, and so they have a better ability to address that. We'll probably see different numbers with the cities.
So that's what I was going to talk about too, is how each one is different depending on how they fund their streets and preservation and maintenance. And I do think for board, some of the stuff graphically is what we want to try to put together. But for City of Vancouver, I worked with Ryan Miles in the city there, and got some information from 2002, 2006, and 2011. And so for a PCI of 60 or plus, it goes 78%, drops to 76%, down to 70% in 2011. Okay.
So the cities are falling further behind more so than the county. The county's falling behind too.
And then for the higher PCI rating of 76 plus, they go from 56% to 51 to 42% on those 3 years. So you can kind of see they are struggling to kind of keep up with that responsibility for preserving the roadway, and the potential future cost might be in preservation and maintenance. And that's really the main thing I was trying to convey.
So I think something we'd like to add into that, because part of then our conversation is the need conversation. So how important is it to get up to the sort of 76 number versus if you're at 60 and can you get to 65 and sort of it's okay, or you really have to get to that higher level. I mean, so what keeps it from the curve, Phil, you were talking about, what keeps us above that? So that, and I know that we can understand that now, but I think that's part of what we want to try to.
Because each agency has their own goals or policies regarding that, but generally from the engineering standpoint, they say you want to keep it at 60 or above, because 60 is like the minimum level. And then you start getting into when you start thinking about rehabilitation, like this below 60.
And do you slice it by, when you guys do that, you look at functional class, so you go, well, it's okay to let a collector go to
Well, that's what I was going to say. I mean, that's another way to cut the data, and it may be too much information, but I think it's important to show what the inventory consists of in terms of functional class.
Yeah.
And then, we track it by functional class, or we can at least query out the average condition of collectors, minors, principals, neighborhood roadways. That's all important information because they degrade at different rates.
Yeah, you're right. And when you decide to rehabilitate, it's dependent on the functional class as well.
So have small cities seen the same issue with the percentage just keeps on 60 above?
We've not even had funding to do the overall system road ratings, so we relied on the state ratings of our arterials. We try to keep our arterials up, so that's our main objective right now. Right now, we're not spending any money on local access roads. One thing we did see is that we saw an actual spike in the overall pavement ratings because of growth. And so you put the new streets, in, that skews the number. And so now you're going to start with less growth. Now you're going to see the numbers start dropping.
That's a great point. That's the local access streets are showing. I know because they're not developing, it's not building arterials.
No, but you're being.
No, in some cases, they'll build a portion of the front.